Hello, Deep Mindfulness Collective. This right here, right now, is the joy of being a live stream coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York, right over here, Brooklyn, New York. And if you're joining us anywhere other than twitch.tv/deepmindfulness, please come on over and join us. Of course, you're welcome to join us from any platform, any place that you should desire. So, let's see here. Folks, as you begin to trickle into this universe we call the Deep Mindfulness Collective's joy of being a live stream, let us know right on Earth where you are coming from. I myself am coming from Brooklyn. Where is it? It's right here today. Today it's right here. It's weird because it's just floating in the air for me. It's like, okay, right in the air, floating in Brooklyn. How about you? Where are you coming from? Where on Earth do we find you on this planet? You know, here in Brooklyn, New York, things are a little chaotic, I'd have to say, at certain times. And where we live sort of just outside of where things might get chaotic in a kind of fortress. I was in a session today, and someone said, "You look like you're in a bunker," and I sort of am in a bunker, because we were, this factory that we live in is converted. We converted it to be like a live space, and next door is a unit that has not been used. So, Meredith from Wisconsin, welcome. Nice to have you here. Haven't seen you in so long. So lovely to have you here with us on the stream. So the space next door is basically empty. So in there, it looks like our space used to look before we did anything to it. Rory, good to see you from Kingston, Ontario. 2020 CL. Hello, fellow humans from England. Lovely. Folks, thanks so much for joining us. It's nice to have you here. We're excited to be today's practice. As you're beginning to trickle in here, let us know what's happening. Let us know what's happening in your practice or any questions that are arising. I have this inkling that I'm leaning towards doing another series, which means that all of the meditations will be structured in one direction for some time. But until then, we're doing freestyle practice, so we can kind of do whatever the heck we want. I mean, we can always do whatever the heck we want, but in this case, what we're planning on doing is going to be either planned or less planned. So let us know your thoughts or questions on what kind of practice you would like to do, what's going on in your practice, or any challenges that are arising, anything you'd like to explore, anything that's been interesting, anything that's been curiosity driving or a factor of interest or success in your practice, and we can explore any of those pieces. But the series that I'm thinking about doing is one on concentration. Frozen. Got him. That was a quick catch. If anyone can explain to me why this camera keeps freezing, I will. You get a shiny 50-cent piece. I do not know. I've restarted. I've tried again. I do not know. But we shall figure it out eventually. You know, when we first started the stream, it was like, our tech friend here, Tamalan, he says that he's never seen more technical problems in a stream than our stream. So that's something. That's a record. That's nice. Look, I have mask beard. That's where the mask lands. What I was going to say is never had so many technical problems. So now we have minor technical problems, which is like the camera freezes now and then. But okay, so folks, as per always, we'll be meditating for about 25 minutes, and it's going to be lots of fun. So what is going on with folks? Where are you coming from? Where the hell is the bell striker? If anyone can just mention in the chat where the hell the bell striker is, that would be helpful. I think I've mentioned this before, but there's this old recording I had of Jimi Hendrix improvising in the studio. And at least the first 15 minutes of the recording are him stomping around the studio looking for a pick. And he's like, God damn it, I can't find a pick. And I feel like if Jimi Hendrix in, what is it, Electric Ladyland, is that the name of the place? In his own studio can't find a pick, then I feel at least less terrible about the fact that here in my own meditation studio I can't find one of the two bell strikers that are frequently here, but also frequently missing. Well, listen, we're going to survive. We can do it, folks. We can make it. Oh. I tried to shout for Raquel to bring me something, but apparently she can't hear me. So that's over. Okay, folks, so finding a nice, comfortable position. Wait, she's right here. How come she can't hear me? I see. Oh, P.S. Our puppy had surgery. I would actually trot her out here to show you her cuteness, her glassy-eyed, like, confusion, and her very cute, as they call it at the vet's office, her Elizabethan cone, which I thought they were just called, like, dog cone. But, you know, Elizabethan, why not? Bunch of extra syllables. Sounds fancy. Her Elizabethan cone, because it's very cute, and her whole belly's all shaved and stuff. Shoot, we had her spayed. And very cute, and also I just don't want to disturb her. I'd rather her just like lay still. Guess what I found, folks? I found a third bell striker. I forgot this one even existed. So, hey, the meditation bell gods are smiling upon us today. Folks, finding a nice comfortable position. So if you're not used to meditation or not familiar with a formal meditation process, I'm going to recommend that you try to maintain stillness for the duration of the sit. Now, of course, if anyone has a background in trauma, background in developmental trauma, thank you, dear. Raquel brought me an enormous peanut butter jar full of water. Welcome to Drinking with Janusz. This will just be a show of me just drinking a weird white beverage continuously for 25 minutes. If you're curious, it is a, what is it called? It's, I took the president's advice. This is Clorox and water. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Don't take the president's advice, generally. No, this is an electrolyte powder known as Ultima Replenisher, lemonade flavor. Very tasty. Had it at my wedding. Love that stuff. Okay, so I was saying something. If you, oh yeah, okay. So finding a nice posture that you can maintain. So here's a pro tip. Oh, if you have a background in developmental trauma, you can feel free to move the body if you need to, and it does help the system meditate well if we can have relative stillness. So stay still. If you find that you need to move, wait a couple breaths, full in and out breaths, and then make the move. Do as minimal as a movement as you need to, and then go from there. Pro tip for sitting still on a cushion is sit at the edge of a cushion or chair so that the hips can rock forward. So if you sit at the edge of the hips, you can notice, if here are the sits bones, you can notice that the hips can rock forward. It's literally probably a size of movement. Oops. Okay, Freezy Cammy. It's literally the size of movement of like a quarter inch or less. And we're unfrozen. So it's probably like this much of a difference in your hips, but it makes a major difference for your spine. So you sit and the hips rock down just slightly. That slight downwards rocking allows the lower spine, the lower half of the spine to curve naturally. It can sort of sit there. And then that allows the upper part of the spine to balance on that. So we're finding a balance point, all based on the fact that the hips are tipped forward just slightly. I know that's very specific, but no one told me that for years, and then had to find out the hard way, which is lots of back pain. So finding that nice comfortable position you can maintain for the duration of the sit, and we will begin in just one moment. Beginning by taking a few comfortable deep breaths and just feeling the body rise and fall. We're going to begin by systematically relaxing the body. And we want to assume that there is some tension there that we can't even detect. So we can physically relax the body more than we can even physically feel. So even if it feels like the body is already relaxed, go ahead and see if you can relax further yet still. There's a way in which it can feel a bit like an active letting go. And doing whatever we need to allow the body to become comfortable, to find stillness. If we're practicing with the eyes open, resting them on a single point, or if we're practicing with the eyes closed, allowing the eyes and the eye muscles to rest. It can be helpful to take a survey of the kind of mind we're arriving to the practice with. And there's a very simple way to do this. We give the mind a very simple task and see what it does with that task. In this case, we're going to look for sensations of the breath. And see if we can stay with those sensations continuously. And this will give us quite a bit of data. It'll tell us the kind of mind we're arriving with. And whatever the answer is, it's not a problem. So if we find that the mind is overly sleepy, foggy, having a hard time touching the crisp edges of the present moment, it may be helpful to observe the bright, detailed, sharp aspects of the breath. Those sensations which we can know very clearly. or if we find that the mind is jittery, has a hard time staying with the breath sensations continuously, we may want to use a softer approach, finding out how we can use gentleness, letting go, physical relaxation to stabilize. If we find that there's a lot of distraction, just noticing, does that distraction feel dull and sleepy, foggy, or does it feel sharp, detailed, lots of instances of being pulled to other clear, crisp sensations? We're going to do an exercise where we're going to tune into this precise breath sensation at this precise moment. Ignoring the part of the mind that tells us that we've felt this sensation before. So we've never detected this sensation in this moment. And if we don't detect this sensation in this moment, we'll never have a chance to detect it again. So we're honoring this sensation. Creating a kind of ritual. Looking for this particular sensation at this particular moment. Paying respect. Making contact, exploring this particular sensation. Letting it go. And starting the process over. This kind of ritual isn't always perfected on our first try, nor should it be. What if our entire sensory system could find harmony to support and stay with these sensations? The mind holding everything that's occurring, distractions or not. As a kind of palette on which this sensation appears. So letting go of any particular technique. Taking a moment to just exist without needing to exist. Being without trying to do anything. And bringing in some awareness of any experience of turbulence, any self that's felt topsy-turvy, unbalanced, lost. We'll begin by recognizing that we return to various selves over and over. We've had this experience before. A self that feels confused or challenged. So, for a moment, simply soaking into the familiarity. This strange layer of comfort within this difficulty. Ah, yes, I know you. We've met many times. Settling in to the comfort of this difficult self, the familiarity. This pattern. For a moment, ignoring the uncomfortable aspect. Simply recognizing that if this wasn't familiar, we wouldn't be able to return to it. And of course, there's the uncomfortable part, but we're going to let that be for now. Connecting with a larger awareness, all of the sensations that are not this uncomfortable self, our sense of space, our sense of sound even. Allowing this awareness to be colored with kindness. This awareness that has the capacity to meet the needs of this challenged self. And we may notice that we get pulled into the gravitational force of this challenged self, of this confused or sometimes ambivalent experience of self. Allowing this kind awareness to use our intuition and speak. In this case, we're not going to speak directly to the challenged self. We're going to speak to this other aspect, the comfort, the familiarity. Perhaps the kind awareness says, I see why you're here. Or, I remember you. I see you. Whatever helps that familiar aspect feel accepted, helps it feel known. I see you. I see you. These more challenged selves arise. This is natural. So we're letting this kind awareness speak to the natural quality of this arising. This is an aspect of a challenged self that is relatively neutral. I see you. I see you. Whatever words or phrase will allow us to settle into the familiarity of this more turbulent self. Now letting go of any particular practice, any particular technique. Still staying with the momentum of what we've developed, but allowing the body to adjust, allowing the body to move however it would like to. Simply knowing this experience and knowing this movement as it arises. If the eyes are closed, allowing them to rest on a single point as they slowly open. And letting this moment here with the body moving, maybe even breathing, however it would like in order to feel comfortable. Allowing this particular moment to be the great teacher. Be that which shows us how this practice might carry into every aspect of our life. Okay. So, what was that like? What happened and what are you like now? We have a lot of camera freezing, I've noticed. That's fine. I'm okay with that. So folks, what was that experience like? What happened and what do you like now? Helpful to list any challenges, difficulties, interesting things, whatever we noticed. Just talking about our practice in general is often quite impactful. As you prepare to talk about what the heck just happened, I'm going to put here a link I don't know the link. I'm frozen again. Okay, I think it might be this new cord. I've got a new cord for the camera, and it all started then. So that might be it. That's funny. Is it Carl Q? Carl Q, maybe. Carl Q muted yourself so you thought we were in silence the whole time. That's very funny. I mean, more or less. We were more or less in silence, so there you go. You can also, if you want to watch the replay, I'm going to put a link here. Have we fixed this yet? I'm asking my co-host here, or my helper here, doing tech support. I don't know if this is fixed yet. If this is not fixed, then this will post like the links 30 times. Posted it once, twice, okay, it's broken. Either way, right here, the one that says youtube.com/deepmindfulness2. Oh, more times. Wow, very impressive. That number 2 has the replay, so the replay will be up in like an hour. And it's frozen again. Okay, today is Technical Difficulty Tuesdays. I think that's great. Today is Technical Difficulty Tuesdays, and it's so difficult that today is actually Wednesday. Jamler says, feeling calm, felt the complaining voice vanishing and not disturbing me emotionally once. Excellent. That was interesting. In general, feeling very, very alert. All right. Alert is what it is. 2020 CL said, time disappeared, relaxation appeared. Okay, great. And that's to track our experience of time is actually very significant, to just notice the system tracking time. And notice notice the flexibility and the change within that. That's good. You get to just notice the complaining voice appear and disappear. And it's also helpful to know that complaining voice you're talking about, Jamler. Often we have a voice or narrative in our mind. Sometimes it's even wordless. It's just sort of sense of how things are. And if that narrative is running, it can produce all sorts of like difficult emotions, and if we stop that narrative, suddenly the emotions stop. This is often the case if we do skillful distraction. If we watch a TV show just to relax, it's like, oh, finally I can just focus on something else, and the system calms down. That's often an indication that the system itself is running hot, connected with a some narrative, some self-narrative that's difficult. So just distracting ourselves can actually be relieving, which is an indication that we have an ongoing narrative that is challenging, difficult. So this is lovely to hear that it chilled a little bit. Stream lagged for me. Did not hear any answer. Womp womp. Well, hopefully you're hearing an answer now. Let's see. I can check if this. The problem is if I check if the stream is lagging, it immediately slows the stream down. So let's see. I mean, lagging is one thing. Lagging is fine. But not playing is another thing. It says everything's rolling. It says we're rolling. So we're gonna roll with that and assume that we're still rolling. Okay. Just let me know if we're still streaming. It says yes, yes, yes. It says we're streaming everywhere, so let me know if that's just something on your side or my side. To go to 2020 CL's comment, time disappeared, relaxation appeared. Yeah, so tracking, okay, great. Thank you, 2020. Tracking time is actually really significant. And at first, when I first had contact with this concept of tracking time, it felt very abstract and strange, etc. But there is this sense right now that where time is moving forward. The moment that existed before the meditation, for instance, that's gone. Even that's pretty abstract. Just the fact that even the words I'm using are occurring in a duration. They feel like they're moving. They feel like there's a certain things take a certain length of time, other things take longer. I can say a word that takes a long time and the mind is tracking, okay, that's a piece of time. So just that even tracking of time is significant. So yeah, that's one of the things. Oh yeah, to talk on jhana. We should have Michael back soon. We did the first half of that talk, and then we have yet to have done the second half. Yeah, I'd love to have him on. That'd be really lovely. We might even do, this is something that might be fun, is to have him along with Raquel, who's currently sort of like studying with him around some of his teachings. But that'd be a great idea. Thanks for the reminder. Listen, this is pro tip for this community. Squeaky wheel gets oil. We have a lot of squeaky wheels, so if you tell me, invite Michael back, I'll remember to do it. So yeah, we should do that. So soon is the answer, hopefully. Let me throw in here this is the Zoom link. If you want to jump on Zoom with us, you can feel double free to do so. Let's see here, let's open this meeting. If you'd like to jump on and ask a question, we'd love to have you here, as per always. Let me set this up. Participantes, excelente. Okay, so if you want to jump in there, ask a question, or give a report, that's the way to do it. Feel free to jump in there. Nick says, or also known as Mirk Goff, says, felt very focused after the concentration stuff, but it feels like I can only remember something when focusing on the mental audio, the commentator distraction. Sorry, the mental audio, commentator distractions. So if I'm not distracted, I have difficulty commenting about the experience later. So, okay, which sounds logical, but maybe not. So, sorry. I want to make sure I understand this. Felt very focused. Okay, I got that part. It feels like I can only remember something when focusing on the mental audio. Commentator distractions. So if I'm not distracted, I have difficulty commenting about the experience later. Okay, I'm a little confused because it sounds like I would think the opposite. The only way you can comment on something or report on it later is if you are undistracted. So help me understand here what you're referring to. That would be helpful. It's not even a question. Okay, well that's good because I'm a little confused. But I'd like to know what you're talking about. That's always helpful. It's helpful for me to know. Veritable Vagabond says, did you do a lot of Shinzen noting in daily life before stream entry? I'm still not grokking the dragon eating its tail concept. Okay, so I'm going to change that question and tell me if this too deeply alters the meaning of your question. Did I do a lot of practice in daily life? And did that help with the idea of what I've talked about, dragon eating its own tail, the practice recycling unto itself, effectively the system moving towards a default in which it practices, the system practices itself? To that I can answer yes. That's been quite a bit of my experience, is practicing daily life quite a bit. There were periods of time where I did a lot of noting, labeling out loud in daily life. I do less now. I do more just sort of letting the system metabolize what's happening. So let me know if that clarifies. Riddle the bag on. So Nick, okay, so you're talking to Nick. Okay, that's I'll let you guys hash that out, and then I'll catch up if we get to a resolution. So basically, I mean, the general drive here is practice in life. Practice in life is very, very significant for developing a serious practice. What was the sort of larger drive that I was talking to people about recently? It's effectively, okay, I want to find this document if I can. Raquel and I wrote down what we think is like a fully functional, applicable, because sometimes it just feels totally unapplicable, applicable definition of what we would call stream entry. Where can we find this? Oh, it's signed in as the wrong user. Okay. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to pull open this. So well, I can tell you what the definition is from memory. So the definition that we've been working with on what stream entry is, and actually I'll split it because we have how you get there and then what the experience is. So the experience is that the system defaults. The key is defaults. The system defaults at metabolizing suffering and tends towards sort of wonder and awe at the simple experience of being. Now, both of those are normal experiences. The key is that it defaults there. The system just tends to gravitate towards that on its own. How does it get there? Well, it does that by naturalizing. This is what I call naturalizing all experience, recognizing that all experience is not something that is alien, because a lot of what our system does is push and pull against reality because it treats things as like, this is alien or this is special and I want that or I don't want that. So it's a kind of purification through equanimity. The good news about that definition, this is part of why we like this, is that each of those parts is very straightforward, right? Naturalizing our experience, meaning recognizing that whatever's happening is nature, accepting, okay, right now the system is very upset or has a painful part or there's a self present or any of these details. And part of that naturalization is a lot of sensory clarity, noticing the sort of location of any particular sensory experience, the interaction of those particular experiences, how those experiences form and deform. I'm sort of tracking along with sort of major insights on the path. The way that these form and deform, and then the way that they sort of come into consciousness and break down from the experience of consciousness, these sort of larger categories of classical insights. Those are ways to naturalize our experience. The good news, though, is that we can do all of that all the time. So we can naturalize our experience by simply observing whatever sense data is arising. We can learn to and train ourselves to metabolize difficulty or suffering in any number of ways. And we can be connected with the awe and sort of majesty of the experience of existing, of being, at any moment. We can do it, especially ideally at this moment, this sort of wonder of like, wow, this is really an impressive sort of set of experiences that's happening. So now it becomes a numbers game. How often can you do that? Well, I can do that, 30 minutes a day, and that's all the time I have. Well, that's great. And if you can do it an hour a day, well, that's going to be that much better. Well, I only have 30 minutes of time for seated meditation. Well, now the answer is I've got to find a way to practice in life in order to raise, sort of the amount of time that I'm leaning in this direction. Why is it a numbers game? Because we're trying to switch the default mode of our system to this new paradigm. Again, I said by default. So we want the system to default in this direction. And in order to do that, we have to show it over and over and over and over again how to do it. It's a little bit like, an analogy could be like, okay, you're going to change a computer over from one operating system to another. But it's not just a matter of programming it in, beep, boop, bop, and then, you see it happen. Maybe you could extend that and say there's a large period of debugging. You're sort of building a second operating system and teaching it how to use that system and eventually teaching it how to stop relying on the original operating system and then shifting over. A more sort of pure or more accurate metaphor would be that it's a learning algorithm. So you're teaching this algorithm how to understand how to do something that is a different operating system. And so each time we refer back to the original operating system, it's going to tend to learn that material. So it's constantly learning. So what we need to do is, as much as possible, teach it about this new operating system until it on its own says, I got it. And it takes over and it starts to learn that we want it to sort of be in this direction, and it will then by default be in that new operating system direction. And ideally, this is sort of one of the things that happens once the system learns to default to this new position. It's often an intermediate period that's very awkward for people, that's challenging, is how to then navigate this old period, this old software, this old material. So for me, self-consciousness was an example of one way that I really used self-centered fear, you could say, to navigate reality. I thought, basically, I would imagine what you were imagining about me, right? A full weird loop. There's several pieces there. And then I would structure my experience of self on that. This is just ordinary run-of-the-mill self-consciousness. So observing that as a structure, then like innately allow those pieces to break apart to some degree. Now, of course, I still feel self-consciousness is an ordinary human experience. We don't want to imagine we wouldn't feel ordinary human experiences, but it's from a very, very different lens. And so the challenge for me arose, and this arises for many people, is a lot of my motivation was based on self-consciousness. Well, I want people to think of me like this, so I'm going to, take these actions and achieve these things in my life. And suddenly that drops away. Well, I don't really care anymore. Well, how do I take action? How do I have ambition? How do I grow in the world? How do I affect change, right? We have a world that needs a lot of change occurring. How do I affect change when I'm not doing it in order for people to like me, right? What if my motivations are different? Well, that's an excellent example because it shows us maybe there could be a different motivation to affect, cultural or social or political change other than whether people think it makes me look good or not, right? And I like that example because it is very clear that that's not an ideal motivation. It's not really going to get us terribly far. So we need to find other motivations in order to drive that practice. And that's part of why I emphasize values, getting very clear, because there's a certain point when the system shifts and we have to decide, okay, what do I structure my life on? Because there's a way in which we can feel like we just don't even know. And we return back to that values exercise. That values exercise is located, you can find it on the internet, but I have some instructions here. Typing. There's a copy of it right there if you want to take a look. Oh, I'm frozen again. Okay. Just type Elsa in the chat and we'll know what you're talking about. Okay. Well, all of the hand motions and gestures I made were clearly unimportant, if not because I was frozen. Scott Nesbitt says, does your definition of stream entry include an insight into non-self? Yes. There's usually that's usually I hear that in the description. Yes, although the description we give doesn't include that for a couple of reasons. One is that we're trying to create the most stripped down version of a definition. So part of it is just for simplicity's sake, but the other part of it is that people talk about that insight differently. So some people call it true self, some people call it non-self, some people call it emptiness. And instead of addressing every, metaphysical concept in one definition, we just change it to a very functional definition. Okay, let's see here. Can insight induce a panic attack? Yes. And I'm frozen. Yes, it can. Insight can produce a panic attack. That is absolutely possible. But anything could produce a panic attack. Typically, what we're going to experience is that people who are prone to panic attacks are often prone to those in part because of an experience that they feel unsafe, or they have some sort of a triggering phenomena, and then they're pushed into a panic attack. So I don't think it's if you say cause, right? Can insight cause this? Well, I don't think it's the only factor. I think it's unlikely that if someone has no propensity for panic attacks, that they are extremely stable and that they can handle a lot of instability. I think that's almost a better way to put it. So if someone can handle a lot of instability, would they necessarily have a panic attack? Well, I think a good way to look at this would be, could a challenging situation cause a panic attack? Yes, of course, a challenging situation could cause a panic attack. Can insight be challenging? Absolutely. But it's a little weird to say, to assume that it's the insight aspect of it that causes this. It's more that it's a challenge. When we enter in on this process, we're entering in on a process of sort of rewriting and reshaping our entire perceptual map of the entire operating system. This isn't a subtle endeavor. Now, there's a lot of subtlety here, but we're talking about a significant change. For some people, that change happens quickly. For some people, that change happens over a long period of time. But we're talking about pretty significant human transformation. And so, yeah, so that's what I would say. We reach certain places where we need to face, huge difficulties. We need to face the experience of, the dread that comes along with death, the, dread that comes along with, our sense of stability, all of these things, or a loss of stability. All of these normal human things are going to happen. That's part of why we generally want to have pretty good life skills in order to endeavor on some of the sort of more psychedelic, the weirder stuff. So let's see, Veritable Vagabond then says, I felt like I was trapped in my body, like being a human being is a really weird and not fun. So that is when we talk about dark night experiences or dark night material, in a way it's like we experience emptiness, except it's like a bummer. It's like a bad trip. And part of the way out of that is to recognize the assessment of it being bad as being equally as empty. I think that part of what happens is that the system experiences a kind of emptiness or kind of instability, and let's fix this camera, this kind of instability, and it then says, okay, this instability is, not a good thing. Now, it might do that unconsciously because on the foreground, we're like, yes, I've heard about awakening and I want to move down this path. That's what I want. But in the background, somewhere below the level of consciousness, it's saying, oh, no, and it's pushing back. And so part of our job is to observe and experience that pushback and use the same practice and the same technique in order to manage that. That said, I do think that there's this theory floating around, and I can't qualify it because we don't have research on 99% of what we know from experience and meditation. So that said, there is a theory floating around that people's dark night experiences are proportional to their experience of developmental trauma. Now, that's a big statement. That's not proven. It's deeply anecdotal at this point. And it's an open question. It's something that I think is interesting enough and relevant enough to my experience that, yes, it's worth exploring. Developmental trauma, another way of looking at that would be maladaptive attachment, in that way. So that's those are some possibilities there. Let's go here to a brief description of emptiness, and then we'll go. We'll see if we can understand what's happening here with this. And let me know. You guys are discussing in the chat, Nick and Jamler. I also don't have to discuss that in the stream if you prefer not. So just let me know if you want me to read back and try to understand that. So emptiness can be described in very different ways. You could talk about it as non-self. You can talk about it as these kind of things. I tend to talk about things in terms of how to get people to have contact with the experience and then try to get them to explore it themselves. So, a couple ways we could explore emptiness. What's a nice way that would be a nice direct experience? Hopefully this isn't... The problem is it becomes very abstract unless you can experience it directly. It's a theory until you can have contact. So I'm going to describe this, but what I'm going to encourage you to do is actually do what I'm describing rather than sort of think about I could imagine doing that. It's like the difference of imagine clenching your hand right now. Okay. And then clench your hand right now and tell me where those two things different, right? So it's partially that aspect. Okay. There's a few ways we could approach this. We could approach this from see-in perspective. We could approach this from time. No, I think CN is going to be be a little bit more straightforward. Okay, so we talked about this in the last stream, but we'll do a little review. So right now, you can likely tell that you are you have a sense of space, sense of location, arrangement. There's a sense of there's in front of you, there's behind you, there's left and right. The mind is just producing space in this way. So you maybe know from practice that this is all relative. There's no actual front or back universally. It only seems to be the front and seems to be the back, or left and right, or up or down, or any of these things in relationship to the body. Something is big because it's bigger than the body. Something is small because it's smaller than the body. Something is sharp because it can cut the body. The mind arranges space and arranges reality based on all of these different pieces. So part of what we're going to be describing in terms of emptiness is a experience of our ordinary world without that conceptual overlay on top, or with that conceptual overlay on top, but we can see that that conceptual overlay is also just sense data. Usually what happens is we can just sense raw data, and then we're like, oh, thinking, naughty thinking, you're on top of that, and that's a concept on top of the sense data. But for instance, right now, if you're beginning to understand what I'm saying, or you're very confused by what I'm saying, can you detect that as a sensory experience? Because, foundational level of insight, everything is sensing. So right now, the understanding that you're developing, can you detect that as a sensory experience? You might not be able to untangle it into its constituent threads. Which part is see, hear, feel, in, which part is body sensation, that is non-emotional, anything like that. But just to detect any sense of understanding that's even occurring from this right now, you're starting to detect the conceptual layer as its own experience. If we can experience our current sensory sort of landscape, you can actually, most people can do this sort of for an instant at least, and this is usually how meditation works. We have a very quick flash of this. To experience your sensory experience, what's happening to you now without the meta-narrative of you, self, world, inside, outside, right? From an art point of view, from an art-making point of view, this is what's called abstraction. I won't define abstraction because I'm sort of defining it here from a perspective of insight. But basically, abstraction is taking things out of the narrative or meta-narrative structure that they're familiar with. Like a photograph is very non-abstract. It's like, that's a picture of what it is. It's a representation. It's linking very closely to what it's representing. This video, right? This video is it's low abstraction because there's a relatively direct link to the referent, which is what's coming into the camera. It's very close to what the eye might perceive. Let's see if we can do this live. I don't know. Again, this is I'm having fun here, so we'll see how this works. Can you right now look at the screen and see it as a flat surface? So I'm going to help, right? Easier to see it as flat. Looking at the flat surface of the black, right? Seeing that as just sort of patches of for me, it's quite patchy. It's not actually one flat color. It's many colors sort of coming together to turn into black. Noticing how flat that is, and you can also see the mind gripping and turning into going between the flatness of this and the spaciousness of the clouds as they sort of appear and disappear. Suddenly they're very present and full, and sometimes they become very flat again. So that dance right there between the sort of flatness and the non-flatness, that's in art making, that's part of what you might call abstraction. It's the same actual structure as the mind producing narrative and breaking down that narrative. So right now you have a sense of self, you have a sense that there's a central character, which is, me, which is the central sort of the character excellence. Like this is the true character who has been navigating the world, the story, the character to which the whole story of reality is happening to. We have that sense that is sort of the central thing, central experience. So if we can observe this present experience in a way that breaks that down even for a moment, well, in a way, we can talk about that as being empty of this larger narrative experience. Now, that's a doorway. I'm not suggesting that that's the full experience of emptiness, but even if for a moment you can experience it without that need to solidify it into a self or world while you're well on your way. That's actually really excellent as an insight. So just to summarize, often at first what we see is, okay, there is sensing, and see it as part of this, okay, there's sensing that's occurring. We don't even see that there's a narrative of self and world. Then we see that there's a narrative of self and world. Then we see the narrative of self and world as just sensing. Then we teach the system that over and over and over and over again, to the point where the narrative breaks down and all we see is the sensing occurring. And the self that it's occurring to is also just built out of sensing, and the sort of the sense of an observer we recognize at some point, that's actually also just a coagulation of different sensing data, and the all the conceptual layers on top become disaggregated, and they themselves become just sense data, and the fullness, or the sort of self and worldness, that duality breaks down. And again, it's a matter of convincing the system towards a default. So we can see that for an instant, and that's excellent. If you can detect that for a minute, not even a minute, if you can detect that for an instant, that's very significant. If you can repeat that, great, do it again. And teaching the system that over and over and over and over again will tend to cause the system to drive in that direction. So hopefully that's a good explanation of emptiness. Good times. Brief description of emptiness. Hopefully that was brief and exciting and fun, as brief, exciting, and fun as it was for me. Nick says, it's basically only relevant if you feel like going into how to improve your memory of something without sacrificing being present with actually experiencing it. Okay, well that, my friend, is a very easy question. It's a skill. So one thing that I recommend to folks, we have a Discord for this, and I think that I can just put the link to the Discord by just typing this. Cha-ching, it worked. We have a Discord here, and what I recommend to folks is, after your meditation, go into meditation reports, the section in that Discord, and just write what happened. The system is very compliant once it recognizes that we want it to do something. It's very lazy. And until it recognizes we want it to do that thing, it will, keep defaulting to the old thing. The old thing is like, yeah, sure, you meditate, you experience stuff, and you just forget it. We don't need to hold on to this. If we ask it to do something enough times, it will eventually say, okay, I surrender, and I'm going to do this. So one way to do that is to write down for ourselves, or on the Discord, this is what happened in my experience. Talking to other people about their experience is another way to do that. Talking to people in general about your practice, what's happening in your practice. These are all ways to externalize and get the system used to reporting what occurred. Upandita was notorious for asking people to, they had a 10 or 15 minute interview with him every once in a while, and he would say, okay, tell me about your longest period of clarity in your meditation. And they'd say, okay, well, I was watching the breath and there was rising and falling, and I noticed a sense of vibration in my legs. And he says, okay, then what happened? Well, I think I was sleepy. Oh, okay, cool. Then what happened? And he basically, that's his whole entire, or a lot of his, questioning system is like, well, then what happened? And so he's actually asking you to instant by instant be able to, as much as possible, remember everything that occurred in a sensory way. Now, I can't tell you, I can tell you some significant details about what happened for me during the previous meditation, for instance, like 15 minutes ago. And I'm not going to be able to track it the same way I could track my sensory experience right now, but it is through training that I can now, I can track back a lot of my sensory experience for all of today because of just training and doing that over and over again. So that would be my recommendation if you want more clarity after you've practiced, is whatever you can remember, write it down, and then repeat for a while, and the system will tend to then remember that material. Willexander Bethany says, Benethy. See, I mix up those letters. The other day I was eating crumpets. I like where this is going. I just want to say, if there's anyone watching this, it happens, who's just like, what do I say? I don't know what to write in the comments. what should I talk? How should I talk about? Start like this. The other day, I was eating crumpets. I promise you. Start like that. Everything else just flows. Nick, when you're writing your meditation reports, that will be your easiest route to awakening. Start every day. I was eating crumpets. The other day I was eating crumpets. Excellent. Okay. The other day I was eating crumpets, but then after a while I realized that they were actually trumpets. Tough. This is a tough one. Now I have to get them surgically removed from my stomach. It was a good experience overall. Hope this makes sense. Oh, trust me, Will Alexander Benethy. It makes more sense than you can imagine. And it's deeply appreciated. I appreciate the vulnerability, the honesty, and especially the pro tip about eating crumpets. Nick says, tracking something to report it later feels like posting my food on Instagram instead of actually tasting it fully. If we're on the topic of eating, by the way, I think astronauts are real too. That's good. Okay. I forget who it was. Maybe it was Will Alexander, but somebody came on the stream to figure out if asking if astronauts were real or were real robots, and that was very helpful. Very interesting dialogue. I hope Raquel's trolling the chat. That'd be great. Rustin man, vibration, yeah. Okay. Beep boop boop. What was I talking about here? This is just getting stranger and stranger, my friends. Okay. So to get to what you're saying, Nick, tracking something to report it later feels like posting your food instead of eating it. Well, listen, I hope those folks who post their food on Instagram actually also, you can do both, right? You can be like, here's my cool food, and then you can actually put the camera down and really tune in to eating the food. Now it's a little reverse order here, but just practice, and then afterwards, as much as you can recall, just write it down and let the system do the work for you. It will eventually start to pull those pieces together for you. Folks, it was lovely to be here with you. Let me tell you that much. As always, lovely to be here with you. Thanks, folks, for your great questions, really fun questions, a really good time. And we will be back here in fewer than 48 hours. Back in fewer than 48. And by then, the world will have reached a place of equilibrium, and everything will be peaceful, and our meditation won't be so strangely out of order. And that said, I have a lovely, exciting wish for you. So my wish for you today is to simply absorb the presentness. This is another tactic to find and discover and explore emptiness. Experience the presentness. Experience the present experience of our senses, the sense of being, the sense of existing, the sense of this moment itself having its own special je ne sais quoi. To allow that, if we allow that deeply enough, we have a direct, enjoyable insight into emptiness. And of course, who wouldn't want an emptiness that doesn't include the richness of existing? That's the ideal. It's a richness that's so full it doesn't even need to be there. So folks, as always, have fun. Support each other. Stay connected. We'll see you back here in fewer than 48. Okay, folks. Make sure to eat those crumpets.